And we are live, folks. Hello and welcome to the In the Tank podcast, episode 227, the podcast that explores work of think tanks across the country. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. And folks, there's only 100 seconds left until the end of humanity, according to the Doomsday Clock. We'll talk about that, climate change, and more on this episode of In the Tank. Joining us today, we have a couple of people. We got Justin Haskins, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. Justin, how are you?
I'm doing so well, Donald. I'm doing so well. How are you?
Oh, amazing.
No one ever asks you how you're doing. How are you doing?
I'm doing amazing, folks.
That's good.
Absolutely fabulous. Also joining us, we have Isaac Orr, Dr. Frackenstein himself, policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. How are you, good sir?
I'm great.
Awesome.
How are you, Donald? Nobody ever asks you how you're doing.
Why do we keep this guy around?
Also joining us, we have Jim Lakely, Director of Communications at the Heartland Institute. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Drinking out of my loser's mug, which is what somebody called it before we went live. And hey, Donnie, I'd like you to explain what is that Napoleon in an alternative universe over your left shoulder?
That is this immortalizes my late pup. He is General Muggins, so he will be immortalized in our background of our show from now on, folks. So yes, that's what that is. Also joining us behind the camera, we have producer extraordinaire Andy Singer himself.
What's up, folks? Finally got a camera. Happy to be
here. Yeah, but turn that off.
Yeah,
yeah, we don't want to see you. All right, off. Bye. All right,
Andy has a camera that works, but not a microphone, so that's fantastic.
Oh yeah, his
well done.
He said hi, folks, and he asked me how I was doing. So right, I'm doing well, thank you. So Jen, we got a lot to talk about. Obviously, teasing the Doomsday Clock, which I got in my bomb shelter. I don't know about you, but before we get into that, there was an interesting altercation that occurred between Angry Dad, which is apparently what he's being called, and Elizabeth Warren at a rally, I guess, that I think would be worth talking about. So we have the video, and we could play that. The audio is not very good, so I'll warn you ahead of time. It's only like 30 seconds, so we'll play it, and I have it transcribed here for you, so I'll read it afterwards. But I think just kind of seeing the body language. Oh yeah, by the way, for all those that are listening on Spotify and audio-only outlets, we are on YouTube now. We are back on YouTube. So check us out. We're exploring ideas to get more community involvement in our show. So get in the rhythm of checking out our YouTube page for this show. So let's go ahead and play that clip, and then I'll read the actual transcription afterwards.
My daughter's getting out of school. I saved all my money. She doesn't have any student loans. Am I going to get my money back? Of course not. So you're going to pay for people who didn't save any money, and those of us who did the right thing get screwed. Of course we did. My buddy had fun, bought a car, went on vacations. I saved my money. He made more than I did. But I worked a double shift, worked extra. My daughter works, she was 10. So you're laughing. Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. We did the right thing, and we get screwed.
All right, go ahead and stop it.
Wow.
So yeah, he says, "You're laughing at me," and I think she said, "I've never laughed a day in my life." But
that I can believe.
Yeah, that sounds right.
That's better than Amy Klobuchar. Oh my goodness. So we get all kinds of like memes about her, but did you see the one where she's like, "I'd like to see how your hair would hold up in a blizzard." Yeah, so sorry, let's get back to the topic.
Yeah, okay. We'll get back to you explaining your meme afterwards. So Angry Dad says, "My daughter is getting out of school. I saved all my money. She doesn't have any student loan debt. Am I going to get my money back?" And she says, "Of course not." To which he responds, "So you're going to pay people who didn't save any money, and those of us that did the right thing get screwed." And she says, "Well, no, you didn't get screwed." He says, "Of course I did. My buddy had fun, bought a car, went on vacation. I saved my money. He made more than I did. But I work a double shift, hoarding extra money, for my daughter's education since she was 10. That cuts kind of muddled. I couldn't hear it. So, and you're laughing at me." She says, "No." He says, "Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. We did the right thing and we get screwed." And she says, "Thank you. I appreciate your," and then she goes for a handshake. He says, "No, that's all right," and walks away.
That guy was salty, man. He was salty.
Yeah. My only problem with the interaction, and I think this kind of really highlights kind of like, the real political problem with something like this, because there's generations of people that took on student loan debt and paid it off, so they're left screwed. But my only problem with the altercation here is that, like, there was no time. It wasn't that there was no time for her to respond. She just didn't choose to respond. Like, I would love to see her actual, like, held her feet to the fire answer to that question.
Yeah, but if he hadn't been so hostile, maybe she would have said something. I mean, he was pretty hostile, so it was obvious that she wasn't going to say anything.
Oh,
I mean,
angry dad. Of course, he's going to be hostile. That's his name.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, come on, you got to give her a shot to respond at least a little bit, I think.
Well, what is the response then, Justin, when he says rightly, look, I work double shifts, we saved and scrimped and to put my kid through college, and now if you're president, you're just going to waive it all? Well, you know, where do I get my money back? And she says, you won't. I mean, that's a valid point. I've made that point on this podcast several times.
So I don't disagree with that. I don't know what her response would be. All I know is that if you're screaming at her, she's probably not going to respond, because that's the way these things are set up. It's a line full of people that are going in there to shake her hand and say something to her. And so, you know, Jim, you've done this 1,000 times. If somebody walked up to some guest that you're responsible for handling or whatever, and someone starts being aggressive with them, what are you going to do? You're going to move them along and get them out of there. And you know what I mean? So if you're going to really try to have a conversation, then you got to approach it a little bit differently. But I don't really think that's what he was going for. I think he was I want to yell at her, and I want to record it. Him. People can see it. And I think that's fine, but I don't blame him.
I just wish that we had like a debate structure when these candidates are going up to debate, where the people that are, you know, moderating the debate could actually ask them these questions and make them answer. We don't have that.
We have all these debates with moderators who should be asking these kinds of questions, and yet they never do. Isn't that? And we have reporters who should also be asking these kinds of questions, sit down interviews where these kinds of questions could be asked, and they're never asked. So now I will say this. One of the things that I think is really, I don't want to say bad about this getting a lot of press, but something that really should be kept in mind is that what this guy is saying here is already the case. It already exists. This is the situation that we have now. See, everybody's talking about these plans for college debt cancellation. Like right now, we don't already have a lot of that, when in reality, we already have that system. If you right now go out and get, you could have hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt right now. And if you wait like 20 years of making payments of income-based repayments, so if you're making $25,000 a year, $30,000 a year, let's say, or 40 or whatever, you're going to pay very little, if nothing, an income-based repayment plan. You wait 20 years, it all goes away. The federal government forgives it. That's already the case. If you work for the government, or you work for a nonprofit organization for 10 years with an income-based repayment plan, all of your federal student loan debt goes away, no matter how much you have. That's already the situation.
Man, I wish I'd known that.
You know, I mean, that's the way the system. So the system is already screwing people over. It's not like this is some fictional thing that could happen sometime in the future. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that income-based repayment plans in and of themselves make all these problems that they're saying supposedly are crushing people non-existent. Because if you're in an income-based repayment plan, your payment is based on your income, not on how much debt you have. So if you have $100,000 of debt and you can't afford to pay it, you don't pay anything. That's the whole point of income-based repayment. So the idea that this is somehow going to save all these people who are suffering under this system, that's totally unfair. There are definitely people who've gotten screwed, who are in difficult situations or whatever, but it's not the vast majority of people, especially people who are in college right now, who are just graduated from college. They are not going to have to worry about that. They'll either be in an income-based repayment plan, or they'll get it forgiven from public service loan forgiveness, or they'll get it forgiven eventually after making years of payments and never coming close to the amount of money they loaned out, or they'll pay it off over a long period of time. But there's no one out there who's being crushed in the same way that you could make like medical bills or something like that might crush a person, because the government has already taken this over and they've already created all these programs.
So you're saying that that the headline of her plan, which is like, oh, yep, all this loan forgiveness or whatever, It's actually like there's less to it than what she's proposing.
I'm saying it helps literally nobody that actually needs help.
Okay.
Literally no one. Literally no one will be helped by it, because even poor, like I said, poor people, if you make no money, you pay nothing in an income-based repayment plan. So who is this helping? And the other thing is that her loan forgiveness is only $50,000, and it only applies to people who the full $50,000 only applies to people who have a household income of $100,000 or less. So what that means is you're going to have all these people with, say, let's say you have $10,000 in student loan debt. You're going to have that wiped out even if you're making $80,000 a year. Well, you don't need to forgive that person's student loan debt. They can pay that back. It doesn't matter. You could have $2,000 in student loan debt and be making $90,000 a year, and she'll forgive that too. That doesn't make any sense. So you're forgiving loans for people who actually can pay them back, and then not forgiving loans for people who, say, have hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt, but because they make more than $100,000, they don't get anything forgiven, or they get only a tiny portion of it forgiven. So the whole thing is just completely stupid and ridiculous. And it's obviously an attempt to win political points, but it doesn't actually do anything. And the fact that nobody is realizing this is just proof of the fact that the system is so convoluted, nobody understands how it actually works. And that's really the issue.
Gentlemen, care to respond or any additional thing to that? I mean, I think we could all agree on that. We know that the government is causing this problem by subsidizing the student loan business, and the best thing that they could do is just get out of the way. Just get out of the way. Stop making it worse. But yeah, Elizabeth Warren, there's no update on our survivor pool, right? No one dropped out, so we don't have to get bogged down into that.
So what? Jim's in first, though?
Yeah, blah, 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 blah. All right, let's talk about Doomsday Clock.
How are you doing in that, Donald?
Shut up. Doomsday Clock. So the bulletin of the atomic scientists came out yesterday and declared that the Doomsday Clock is set down to 100 seconds. This is the lowest it's ever been across the entire decades that they've been doing this Doomsday Clock thing. So you could pull up the chart there. You could see basically since the mid 40s, the bulletin of the atomic scientists have been doing this little chart or whatever. So according to their website, it says the Doomsday Clock conveys how close humanity is to catastrophic destruction, the figurative midnight, and monitors the means humankind could use to obliterate itself. First and foremost, these include nuclear weapons, but they also encompass climate-changing technologies and new developments in the life sciences that could inflict irrevocable harm. So yeah, like I said, this is the lowest it's ever been. For the past couple of years, it's been kind of stuck at 2 minutes. So this is the first time that it went up to or down to, whatever way you want to look at it, 100 seconds. And so as you can see by this chart, you can see it's fluctuated over time. I think the longest it's ever been, or the furthest from midnight, is 17 minutes over there in the 90s. But again, like I think it was at 3 minutes back in the 50s there. So Jim, you were in like college during the 50s. So what is your perspective on this?
Yeah.
Stick burn, Donald.
Yeah, actually, I was in high school in the 50s. So.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So
Really?
Give me a little credit.
No, I don't think so.
Really. Not really. No, I was in college during the Cold War, though, and high school during the Cold War. What I find funny.
Cold War.
Google it. All right, that's fine. But what I love about the chart, though, is that at what they call the height of the Cold War, 1984 to 1987, and of course that was because Reagan got reelected, and we were almost at global oblivion, not because of the Soviet Union, but because Ronald Reagan was such a danger to the world. We were 3 minutes to doomsday. The Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. Kennedy and Khrushchev, they nearly blustered us into nuclear war. That was 12 minutes to doomsday. But here we are today. Today, we're only 100 seconds away because, I don't know, the global temperature one day is going to be 1 degree Celsius or so warmer 80 years from now. Yeah. I mean, how can anybody take these guys seriously? And I wonder, when I see this kind of stuff, is there a single thing that the left touches that it doesn't turn into a complete farce?
Well, I wonder if there's just like a diminishing returns when it comes to this, and like they're not going to grab headlines if they go back up to 5 minutes. Like you could see over the past 2.5 decades that they've only gone down pretty much. So I just wonder if we're going to get to a point where it's like 75 seconds, 4 seconds, 2.5 seconds. Like, what is it really going to get to? But I watched their presentation about like why they decided to move it down to 100 seconds. And they do have a guy that was on there just talking about the existential crisis that is climate change, and, you know, that 50 years from now, whatever, right? All of that stuff. They also talked about the situation with Iran and how that's gotten heated pretty much just before they made the announcement. Then accessibility to nuclear weapons. They talked about deep fakes, which we've talked about on this podcast, which I thought was kind of interesting. They said that the falsehoods have a potential to foster economic, social, and military chaos because people can't tell whether or not some video is true or not. They also talk about the Space Force, anti-satellite technology that opens up a new frontier for conflict in space, and how India, the US, and Russia have been kind of exploring this technology. Hypersonic weapons, cheaper and accessible bioweapons, and then artificial intelligence-based weapons programs. So they had like these guys going up talking about their niche. So one person came up just talking about nuclear weapons. One person came up just talking about like bio warfare. And then they had somebody come up talking about climate change. And I just thought, like, this doesn't seem to be like in the same conversation. Like, yeah, if a nuclear war breaks out, yes, it could theoretically be 100 seconds before we're annihilated. But like climate change, like even like the AOCs of the world still put that at like 12 years. So I just don't get why that's even part of the conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point. Go ahead.
A whole, like, I want to see when it was 0. Like, how far back would we need to go for the doomsday threat to be 0?
Never. We were always on the road to doomsday.
Yeah, 12 hours from midnight. Yeah, when was that?
What does this even mean? Can someone explain to me what it even means? What do you mean 12? What is 12 hours? What's the conversion rate here to actual time?
Yeah, is this a 24-hour thing?
Can someone please tell me what the conversion rate is so I know when the end of the world is actually going to come? I mean, if 30 seconds equals what? 12 years? Is that what I'm being told? I mean, how much time do we have left right now? What is it? What are we at?
100
I don't think that they're trying to do that, though, Justin. I think that this is their own thing, right? But yeah, I agree with you.
No, so I know that, but the point is,
do you, Justin?
I do. I just don't get what this even means. And if doomsday never comes, and you're constantly saying we're almost at doomsday, then isn't at some point like you're just really bad at predicting that doomsday is right around the corner? Shouldn't it have happened by now if we were so close all these different times?
Well, I think it's at any given moment we could be 100. Like if things just turn hot, nukes start launching, we're 100 seconds away from doomsday. I think that's what the thing is. But if that's the thing, then climate change doesn't factor into any of this.
Well, but that's been true since there's been nuclear weapons, theoretically, right? So then it shouldn't change. Well, shouldn't it be roughly the same always? I don't get it.
Look, it's a marketing tool used by leftist anti-nuke activists. That's where this all started in the first place, and it's to warn. It's actually quite brilliant. It's to warn the public of the dangers of nuclear annihilation and the idea to bring us back from the brink. But of course, since the Cold War ended, they have what a surprise! They shifted instantly to climate change. And yeah, I guess the doomsday clock should say 12 years. We should use a calendar, I guess, instead of a clock. But the idea,
let's have the Mayans make one.
Yeah, but it keeps ramping up. So their notion is that we are within 100 seconds of global annihilation because of climate change. They might as well just say it's already 0, that we're already there. Doomsday is already here. We've been told this, that it's already too late. We're all going to be drowning in rising seas. We're all going to be burning up in deserts, although in the 70s, we're all going to be freezing from a new ice age. But actually, the doomsday clock should say 0. Time's up, everybody, because that's what their marketing is anyway. And so 100 seconds is just a kind of a way to keep this going. They would never let us get there because then they would lose the marketing gimmick.
Well, there was a couple of things. I looked up one article on Cato that was basically saying similar to what you're saying, or maybe Justin, that's just like the doomsday clock isn't nearly as dire as they make it seem. And the idea that at the height of the Cold War, the USSR had 40,000 nuclear warheads. This is reported. and how the U.S. had like 30,000, and now Russia and the U.S. have less than 5,000, and that's reported. And that's according to the Federation of American Scientists. So there's that takeaway. But one interesting thing that I saw, because I was just kind of going through this, and I'm familiar with the Doomsday Clock, but I wanted to kind of understand the About Us section of this organization. So I looked into it a little bit. This is on their main website, and they have a section about climate change, and it says, the first sentence, it says, fossil fuel technologies such as coal-burning plants powered the Industrial Revolution, bringing unparalleled economic prosperity to many parts of the world. And then it goes on talking about climate change. But at least they acknowledge that. Like, can't we think of that as a win? Like, come on. How often do you see climate alarmists, like, admit that at least?
That's true, Donald.
Progress, I guess.
Progress.
That's what they say.
Yeah, so the only other thing that I would want to talk about.
Oh, shucks, progress again. It's like they're shaking the 8-ball, and it's like, will people die this year? And it's like, probably not. And they're just spiking on the ground. They're just mad.
Well, they don't want people to die right now, because then they don't have any use for any of this language, like Jim was saying. You have to have a solution, potentially. The solution, of course, being that they take over all of society. If we're all going to die right now, then it's too late, and we might as well just not give them the power that they're asking for. So there has to be a solution. That's what's going to be so interesting to me, is when the 12 years comes, what they just, I know what they'll do. They'll pretend that was never really a thing, or whatever. But I don't understand how intellectually anyone can take them seriously if you put a timeline on it like this, and then that timeline ends, and then you're still going to be calling for us to do things. What's the point at that point?
This is why this is a lesson, abject lesson in the law of diminishing returns and apocalyptic marketing. I mean, you can't go anywhere else from that, and that's why I call it a climate cult. These people are cultists because they are like those weird cults that say the world's going to end on this specific date. Then Doomsday, or the world does not end on that certain date. So then the guru says, "Oh no, I meant next month or next year," or I read the goat entrails incorrectly. It's actually in 3 years. And then that date comes and nothing happens, and people eventually leave the cult. And one of the things that makes it hard for people to leave the climate cult is that our culture and our media are also in the cult. They don't let anybody escape because they don't let the real truth about this come out. You would hope that this is yet another tool that is absurd, and that people can see through this and will understand that, the climate is changing, that humans may have some impact on that, but it's on the margins, and that any global climate change that's occurring, it occurs all the time, and that the best thing to do is to continue to progress economically and intellectually as a society, so that we can deal with these inevitable, unstoppable effects on the climate, so that we can all live more prosperous and healthy lives. That is a reasonable thing that somebody reasonable would say that isn't in a climate cult. But then that's where we are.
I really think you're being unfair to cultists here. Because the cultists truly believe, when they read the goat entrails, that this is the end of the world is actually going to happen. I don't think that these people making these predictions, in at least the short-term predictions, believe the short-term predictions are real. They might believe the long-term predictions are real, like 80 years, 100 years, whatever, but they don't believe that we only have 12 years left. I don't think they actually believe that. I really don't.
It's a means to an end. It's a means to an end of power.
Wait, Justin, I think you know the inner workings of the mind of AOC better than anybody. So does she really believe? Is she a believer? Is she a cultist, or is she using this as a means to an end? What do you think?
She's a cultist.
I agree. I would have said that was my one objection is, Justin, maybe you're right about like the Bill McKibbins or the Michael Manns, but AOC is.
No, she's real. I mean, I've seen enough clips of her lamenting, over her dishwasher with a bottle of wine or whatever, about how the world is, about how she's not sure if we should bring kids into the world. Yeah. Because I don't know if I can live in a universe where I'm bringing kids into this world and they're all they're going to die. It's an existential threat to humanity. That's what they're actually out there saying, that we somehow, human beings, cannot survive in a world that is warm, regardless of who's causing the warming. Who cares? Well, why is it that these people believe humans are so stupid that they won't be able to survive moderate warming or even extreme warming? Have you been to Phoenix, Arizona? It's really hot. It's hot like that all the time. And yet somehow people have managed to survive in Phoenix, Arizona. How is it possible?
And not only that, there's more people in Phoenix today than there was 50 years ago.
Yeah, there's people from, people in Illinois now. There's like thousands of people from Illinois flooding Arizona all the time. How is this? If global warming is such a danger, then why are all these people moving to the desert? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, even if you take it to its extreme end and you say, yep, it's all going to be it's going to be 10 degrees warmer. I mean, no, it's not, but let's say it will be. We will be fine. Human beings will be fine. We'll find a way. We're really smart, and we've managed to survive all kinds of horrible conditions throughout the course of humanity. We will be okay.
So there's another kind of interesting component to the presentation during this Doomsday Clock thing. And they do it every year. If you look at that chart, you could see that there's long stretches of time that they didn't do it. It was like every 5 years, every 4 years. Now it seems like they do it every year. But I was watching the presentation, and when it comes to the nuclear stuff, they were talking about how they want countries to sign nuclear no first strike compacts or whatever, and there were some other potential solutions to other things. When the guy came up to talk about climate change and the solutions about that, he was saying some of the stuff that we joke about, where it's they have these yearly conferences and nothing comes about it. Every year they do one of these COP 20 whatevers, and it doesn't amount to anything. And he was basically saying how the biggest success that they've had in the last decade was the Paris Climate Agreement. And he said how that wouldn't even come close to solving any problems, and how that would have to be scaled up 8-fold to meet whatever goals that they had established. So it's at that point,
climate cults. Andy could put that up as a flashing thing on here. If you think Paris isn't enough and we need to do that 8 times over, that's not a rational thinking human being. That's a climate cultist.
Yep. So prophets of doom, as one person would call it, which is a nice little segue into the next topic that I want to talk about. Can
I hit on one last thing before we do it? I'm sorry to ruin your segue, but I just think it's funny that people that use atomic weapons as a means of scaring people about nuclear energy are the ones who are getting the doomsday clock even closer because of climate change.
Sure.
Because Schellenberger, he talks about all the time that the reason that we don't like nuclear power is because we associate it with the bomb. So what better way to make people more afraid of nuclear power than to talk about how we're 100 seconds from doomsday because of nuclear weapons and the climate? Totally counterproductive.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point. See, this is why we have.
Sometimes I'm not just the color commentary on here.
So Donald Trump was at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, just this past week. And so I've got a piece here. I don't know if there's anything really interesting to talk about it, but I do have a clip of him, and we should play that. So I think I have a time code that I asked you to play it at. It's 2 minutes.
This is a time for optimism. Fear and doubt is not a good thought process, because this is a time for tremendous hope and joy and optimism and action. But to embrace the possibilities of tomorrow, we must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse. They are the heirs of yesterday's foolish fortune tellers, and I have them, and you have them, and we all have them. And they want to see us do badly, but we don't let that happen. They predicted an overpopulation crisis in the 1960s, mass starvation in the 70s, and an end of oil in the 1990s. These alarmists always demand the same thing: absolute power to dominate, transform, and control every aspect of our lives.
All right, stop it there.
Let radical socialists.
Oh, he was actually let it play one more second. Sorry.
Destroy our economy, wreck our country, or eradicate our liberty.
All right, pause it.
America.
So, like, come on, man. Does he watch the show? This is exactly what we talk about all of the time.
You can at least retweet us.
Yeah, come on, Trump. Retweet us. What the heck? But yeah, the perennial prophets of doom. He goes through the litany of failed predictions in the past. We've had shows dedicated to that, and how they don't actually want any real solution. What they want is for us to give them full power to be able to transform the economy in any way that they see fit, under the illusion of solving this hypothetical problem that'll happen in 50 to 100 years.
Yeah, I find it actually very remarkable that Donald Trump said those things at Davos. I was reading through the transcript. I think he had one applause line. That wasn't it, but it was, you know, they didn't throw tomatoes at him, and they didn't, you know, they didn't walk out because they realized, well, the reason he was there was to talk about the economic success of the United States under his presidency, because he deregulated, he cut taxes, and now we have lowest unemployment in decades. We have the highest employment rate for Blacks and Hispanics and other minorities that has ever been recorded since we started recording those things. And then he is there. You have to think about back when Barack Obama used to address the World Economic Forum in Davos. It was like the hottest ticket in town. Everybody couldn't wait to go in there and basically throw roses at his feet. And they were, you know, they were wrapped on every single word that he said. And most of what he said was embracing a globalist agenda, telling Europe and everybody they're doing it right, and America is screwing it all up. But here we have a president who doesn't just tout America's economic success because of embracing and letting and unleashing the free market in the United States, but actually goes to them and tells them the same week that they just, you know, they feted Greta Thunberg up there for her scolding of the world on climate change, and says, you know, this is exactly the same as all of these other panics. He articulated all of them. We talk about Paul Ehrlich all the time on the show, at least I do, where the population bomb, a prophet of doom, as he says. And so, you know, he said, I shouldn't be alive today. I should have starved. My family should have starved decades ago. You know, and so he actually laid it out, the prophets of doom and what they have said over the years. They have been wrong about every environmental disastrous prediction for going on 60 years. And nobody, no American president certainly, has ever had the guts to tell them that to their face. The room was silent. Nobody booed, but they had to listen to it. And it was fantastic to have an American president say that to them on such a big, big stage.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely amazing to see it, you know, to see an American president saying these things that we talk about on this podcast. It's amazing. But I honestly, like, maybe Andy, you could look into this, but like sectioning like prophets of doom, like as a little sound drop, we have to have that. That's like my favorite thing.
So I like this part of the speech. If you listen to the whole YouTube clip that Donnie will probably link to in the show notes,
will do.
Like the first minute, Trump just sounds really bored while he's reading stuff off. Like, America has the cleanest water and the best air, and it just sounds like work. But then once he starts to get like beating on socialism, like he starts to pick up a little.
Yeah.
He was a little low energy Jeb to begin that for me, but he did get back to being high energy Donald.
Yes.
Towards the end of it. Are we going to listen to the rest of it?
I mean, we could finish off the clip. I don't want to go backwards.
Yeah, I don't want to either, but
yeah. Okay, finish it off.
America will always be the proud, strong, and unyielding bastion of freedom. In America, we understand what the pessimists refuse to see. That a growing and vibrant market economy focused on the future lifts the human spirit and excites creativity strong enough to overcome any challenge by far.
Yeah. I mean, I just like, I love the optimism of that idea, like that, just like our current, yeah, it was kind of like what Jim, you were saying, like we can grow beyond these problems. Like this is not something that we have to just like stunt our growth to take care of a phantom menace, if I want to invoke George Lucas. But yeah, earlier on in the clip, he talks about how he favors the 1 trillion trees initiative, which was launched at the World Economic Forum. And so I was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting idea. And I was reading through this piece. This is from the Atlantic Council. And it was basically the way that this read, and I won't go into it in depth, but the way that this read was like, now that Trump's in favor of the 1 trillion trees proposal, we're against it. So that just kind of goes to like the whole Trump derangement syndrome, I guess. But that kind of ties into this other article that I have here, which is GOP looks to counter Green New Deal with a 3-pronged climate change plan report. So it says Republicans looking to counter the Green New Deal are planning a climate change proposal of their own, taking a multi-pronged approach to improving the environment. The effort, according to Axios, is being spearheaded by House Minority Leader Representative Kevin McCarthy, alongside Representatives Garrett Graves and Bruce Westerman. McCarthy held a caucus event on climate change Thursday and appears to be taking action that counters critics who believe the GOP is not concerned in environmental issues. So again, it's 3-pronged. So the first one is apparently capturing of carbon dioxide emissions. Part of this includes what's being called the Trillion Trees Act. It also expands tax credits for companies that capture and store carbon dioxide. Second, part of the plan is the promotion of clean energy technology by doubling investment in clean air research and lowering taxes for companies that export clean air technology. Nuclear power and natural gas are also featured in the plan. And then the third part includes cleaning up pollution from plastic, urging government labs to develop improved recycling methods, and directing foreign aid to nations whose rivers suffer the most from plastic pollution. So if this is being proposed as the Republicans kind of plan to deal with something that the other side will say that they're not worried about, Jim, I'm going to go with you. Is this something that people on the right should get behind, or what?
No, because
why do you hate the planet, Jim? Why can't we just have one nice thing for the planet?
Nah, it's because I'm old and I'm not gonna be here much longer, so I don't care, I guess.
Well, yeah, that's too much tobacco, Jim.
All right. So no, look, it all comes from the place that it admits a problem that isn't a problem. It admits that human activity is causing a climate crisis. Human activity is not causing a climate crisis, and so if you give that point away, you're just basically negotiating terms of surrender to the central planners of the world to organize all of our lives. So for me, that's kind of a non-starter. Plant 1 trillion trees, sure. I mean, what's the harm? Except for, we have to find all the land and use it just for trees instead of other.
That's the one that I'm the most skeptical about.
Right.
Really? I thought that would be the one that most people could get behind.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean it's smart. I mean, one of the reasons why we have such catastrophic forest fires right now is because the forests are too thick. Right. So if you're going to plant 1 trillion trees, where are those going to go precisely? And does 1 trillion sound like a scientifically determined number, or does that sound like a politically expedient soundbite?
Yeah, I mean, even the clips are like the things that they talk about it. I think that's just the name of it. I don't think they're actually going to do 1 trillion trees. But
and why would you call it that?
I don't know. It's a catchy name. It's better than like 760,054 trees.
No, it isn't. Accuracy is always better.
Well,
yeah. So I don't know.
I mean, call it the Future Forest Fires of America, the FFA.
Isaac, I'm gonna go to you. What do you think of this 3-pronged approach? And if you don't like certain bits of it, is there any bits that you would add to it?
Well, I thank you for asking. I guess I should have waited for my turn. Yeah, I don't like it. I do agree with Jim that it is kind of ceding territory that's unnecessary to cede. And why would you bother doing this when all you have to do is crap on the Green New Deal as being the most bonkers thing ever? So
how dare you?
Greta, you just made me question my entire life and all the choices that I've made. I'm going to go trade in my Chevy Equinox for a Prius tomorrow.
That might be the most perfectly timed audio drop in the history of any podcast I've ever heard.
That's great.
That was pretty good. I think the interesting thing about this is it's really, really stupid. And here's why. If you accept the premise that we're headed for a climate change catastrophe caused by human beings, then going in the more moderate direction is not going to help you solve the problem.
Exactly.
So if you accept the premise that we are all going to die if we don't stop climate change, then planting a bunch of trees and you know, having these tax breaks for certain kinds of companies and cleaning up freaking plastic in a river in Africa or something is not going to stop a climate change catastrophe that is supposedly an existential threat to human civilization.
Exactly.
So on this point, I would actually agree more with AOC than I would with these stupid Republicans, because at least if you buy the premise, then it makes perfect sense to say we have to radically change everything we're doing. Now, granted, AOC has all these social, you know, she has a socialist agenda on top of it. She's not just interested in doing that one thing. But at least if you buy that premise, it makes sense that we have to do something. Now, her argument doesn't make sense either. That doesn't actually go far enough, because it doesn't really matter what we do in the United States. Global CO2 emissions are going to go up all the time. It's going to continue to go up no matter what we do here. So really, the only actual solution is to force every single country on the planet, or at least all of the big industrialized countries, to stop emitting CO2, which is impossible. It's not going to happen. And so even AOC, it doesn't go far enough. But the point is, the Republicans are so far beyond where you would actually need to go to solve the problem if you believe the premise, that it's just idiotic.
Yeah,
It's
nobody
stupid.
will give them brownie points for this. Like,
Right.
it's really stupid. It's like, oh, we have a problem on the scale of World War II, and the Republicans are like, well, here's a spork.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, how about, what if it was just like kind of
Trillion spork.
what if it was like something that you would want
Hello,
to do
America.
anyway?
I've got this spork. We're going to fight the devil. The devil's climate change.
Why do you have a Texas accent?
It's because it's my strategery. Hello, America. I loved Will Ferrell as George Bush. He was just so good. Just like there was that one episode where what are you gonna try to cut me off?
No. We're trying to see where this tangent.
This better pay off. Here we go.
Yeah. Was Dick Cheney, and he's there, and Dick Cheney's at the desk, and like somebody gets a call. It's like, oh, I gotta take this. Like, don't say anything. So Will Ferrell runs behind the desk, and he's just like, "Hello, America." Underwear. Fart.
Okay. And
Yeah, for that. Let me just. Can I just make one more point on this? And it's the reason why Republicans are doing this. And Justin is absolutely right that you know, it would be half measures and doesn't mean anything. But actually, I got to blame, as I often do, because I'm the old guy around here. I'm going to blame millennials and Generation Z coming up behind them, because polling data tells these Republicans that, you know, the younger generations are concerned about climate change. And the Republicans have no electoral future if they don't do something to address climate change. And so they have to come up with something. So they come up with stupid schemes like cap and trade. You know, basically that's what this is. You know, market-based incentives in which the government forces businesses to do things. That's not market-based. That's government force. And so they have to come up with something, or else they think they're all never going to win another election.
You raised
where instead they should just tell the truth. I think young people can understand and can hear the truth.
For the last 30 years.
Look, man, that's what this is. And it's so pathetic to see that the Republicans are becoming squishy on an issue where they could win because they have the science and the economics on their side, and they're giving it up because political consultants tell them you'll never win another election unless you go green. It's infuriating.
But don't you think that there is there, I'll pose it as a question, is there room for us to find common ground if it was just something like, you know, we want to loosen the red tape when it comes to nuclear energy production?
For sure.
Sure.
I mean, like, or even natural gas. Oh yeah, okay, and it's got less CO2. Okay, you guys could be happy about that, but in reality, we just want more natural gas and nuclear energy. Like, couldn't those be more common ground type of things that we can get behind? Maybe if you don't do it on the basis, if you don't do it on the basis of, this existential climate catastrophe, but you could still do it, right?
Yeah. The way to do it, if you were going to do what the Republicans did, the trillion trees things make sense because it's cheap and it's easy for people to understand. So I get that. But if you really wanted to do it, you would say, we are going to do everything we can to make nuclear power the thing that everybody everywhere on the planet is relying on for their energy. That would be the easiest way to do it. Now, it's not necessarily the most economic, approach to doing things, but none of these things are economic. I mean, they know that going into it. That's the whole point. If it was economic, then people would just be doing it anyway. Right. So the idea here is that you have to find something that is not a part of a free market, ordinarily part of a free market approach to this, and then impose it. So if you're going to impose something, that makes the most sense to impose by far. It's not even there's nothing else that even comes close to it. So all this other crap about tax credits and, this is all, it's just stupid stuff. If anything, I would argue that a lot of that is probably cronyism and stuff like that, where they're giving away cash to some industry. Notice how they talk about natural gas in there. Well, I'm a big fan of natural gas. I love natural gas. But why would you, if you believe we're headed for an existential crisis, even for a moment, want natural gas at all, if you think natural gas is contributing to the climate crisis? So again, why are they doing that? It's probably about some kind of cronyist type thing, if I had to guess. Yeah, so, or maybe they're hoping it will be a cronyist type thing. So it's just, again, it's so incredibly stupid. It's so incredibly stupid. It's all about scoring political points and trying to win favor with the media. Honestly, I think that's the biggest thing. I think this is about trying to get an op-ed in the New York Times or something. That's what this is actually about. Well, you know what? They will temporarily pay a little bit of attention to you if you support them on one of their key issues, and then they'll forget about you next week. But they might pay attention to you for a week or two and give you some positive press. And to some people, that matters more than anything else. But it's so stupid. It makes no sense. It won't solve the problem. It's literally just all about looking good with certain people. Jim says with younger voters, there's no question that younger voters are more inclined to believe it. But actually, it's not as stark of a difference as you might think. We actually had a poll early in November of likely voters, and 18 to 39-year-olds, one of the questions we asked was, how likely is it that climate change will be catastrophic for humans, plants, and animals? And 49% of 18 to 39-year-olds said very likely. 49%. So that's high. It's higher than the other categories, but 65 and over, it was 42%. So it's not a gigantic gap there. And then 58% of the same group of the 18 to 39-year-olds said that climate change is being mostly caused by human activity. So again, 58%, 42% said it's either a long-term planetary trend or they're not sure. So these are not insurmountable numbers here.
Sure.
You can win the debate still with these people. You don't have to buy into all of this stuff to score political points. So if that really is the motivation, it's more proof that these people are idiots.
Well, it's always like you ask the question, what are the most pressing priorities for you in this election? Right. And climate change is always like the last or the second to the last one.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. And that is in a universe where these people actually believe that it's possible that you can solve the problem by passing the Green New Deal or something like that. So they think it's possible to solve the problem by doing that, and they still don't care. When in reality, it's not even possible to do. So if they knew that, if they knew they couldn't even solve the problem, how much further, we can't go further down than last, I guess, but it would be even less important to voters if they knew they couldn't actually fix it anyway. Right. Which is the reality of the situation. Scientifically, it is impossible for Americans to fix this problem.
Gentlemen, I think we could move on to a related topic, thematically related. It's actually very unrelated, which is healthcare. So I've got this piece, and it's from the American Enterprise Institute. This is the piece that we punted last week, so we're finally getting to it. It is titled "The Why and How of Market-Driven Medical Care." So it kind of goes through and explains how like Republicans are really good at explaining why Obamacare is a nightmare and how Medicare for all, Medicaid for all, whatever, is going to be terrible. Medicaid expansion is a bad idea. And this kind of explores, well, what are the Republican ideas that are being proposed here? So we can't constantly just be on defense. Like, what's the offense? So this gentleman, who's a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, James Caprita, he wrote this article, and he goes through the first kind of section is just identifying and outlining the role of regulations, the role of insurance, and the political realities about subsidies and other programs that are related to healthcare. He goes through and talks about, obviously, the things that we all know. I won't get into it, just like how government interventions can stifle innovation and create regulatory capture, misallocate resources, whatever. So he goes into what he thinks are like the two main reforms that could be passed or whatever to help get us back to a market-driven healthcare system. The first being federal government should proceed with an aggressive price transparency initiative. How the initiative should begin with the development of a robust and mandatory pricing list comprised of common medical procedures, et cetera, et cetera. Second major reform should be an adoption of defined contribution payments when subsidizing enrollment into health insurance. This reform, sometimes called premium support, would create strong incentives for enrollment in insurance plans that can effectively manage the costs of patient care because the government contributions would not increase with the expenses of the plans chosen by consumers. So again, this will be linked in the show notes for sure. But I thought that, similar to the Republicans trying to come up with this, their plan to address climate change, I want to have the same conversation, but with healthcare. What are the Republicans? What's the free market proposal for the healthcare system? Because unlike with the climate change one, I think we can all kind of admit that the healthcare system is very screwed up. Before Obamacare even entered the picture here, it's been very screwed up. So what is the first off, I'll go to Jim first again, and then I'll come to
elder statesman.
But I guess, do you agree with this? The 2 points that this gentleman is making about how we can go approach this, or what else would you add to the conversation here?
Well, I mean, yeah, the Republicans have never really had any good ideas on healthcare, at least nothing that seems to have gotten any traction. And this actually is related, as you said, kind of to the climate deal, where they're seeding the ground that what the healthcare system needs are more rules, just different kinds of regulations. This traces all the way back to companies, having price controls imposed on them, providing health insurance as a benefit to get more people to work for their company instead of their competitor's company. Yep. And so this has developed this way over decades. And instead of separating health insurance as a benefit to something that individuals pay for themselves, it has perpetuated this. And then you throw in Medicaid, Medicare, and all the other government healthcare programs from the Great Society on forward. And then that's where you end up where we are today. So Republicans today are still just trying to work within the system. And what they need to do is break the system to go back to, the real free market principles that ruled our healthcare system before the government got involved by forcing, this to be provided as a benefit. The biggest they need to think about and express things in more broad principles. Just the idea that you should be able to personally own your health insurance and take it with you everywhere you go. We don't have a national car insurance system in this country. We don't have a national home insurance system in this country, but we have a national health insurance system in this country. And there's no reason for that. It was created by government. It should be dismantled by government. And if you have personal ownership in your own health insurance plans, and you can take and portability, you can take them anywhere you want, and you can buy them from anywhere you want. That is the road. It's not a panacea. It won't solve everything right away, but it will put in place some of the free market mechanisms that will end up letting the market reform the healthcare system instead of always having the government have to reform the healthcare system, because the government cannot do that, because the needs of Americans and their health needs are so diverse. The incomes are so diverse that, everything that we need is not something that a government can plan. The reason it has failed is the reason all government planning has failed is because government does not have enough information or expertise to make the right decisions.
Yeah, I definitely can see what you're saying, how this almost like is the idea of like, well, what is the government going to do? And I think that everyone on this side of the table is saying, well, we want the government to get more out of the picture. But Justin, I know that you've written on this idea probably more than any of us combined. So weigh in on this.
Yeah, so there are actually a lot of really fantastic ways to improve the system. The system is trash, as you suggested earlier, Donnie. I mean, it's just total trash. There are plenty of ways to fix it that have been floating around in think tank circles for a long time, but Republicans have never taken on any of these things. They never want to have a big, bold, grand vision for fixing healthcare. One of the biggest things that you have to do, so Jim mentioned, he really hit on one of the key points. One of the biggest problems we have is that your health insurance comes from your employer, generally speaking. That's half the country. It's from an employer. And because of that, it's not portable. That's what Jim was also referencing. You can't just take your health insurance with you when you leave your job or you get fired or laid off or the company closes, whatever the situation is. You can't take your health insurance with you. You have to go get health insurance again. And that's a massive problem if you want to have a system that doesn't require people to buy health insurance or have pre-existing conditions clauses and things like that, because you'll have someone who has health insurance and then they get cancer and then they lose their job and now they have to go get health insurance again, and it's really hard for them to do in some cases because they have a pre-existing condition, right? And so if you allow pre-existing conditions to exist in this, I mean, if you take that issue away, which is what Obamacare did, now you don't really have health insurance because now you can wait to get sick and buy health insurance then. And you've got the rest of the people who are buying health insurance when they're not sick, subsidizing these people. So these are the major problems. So if you had a system that provided tax breaks to businesses who, instead of giving their employees health insurance, you take that tax break away, and instead you give them a tax break for filling a HSA account with money equal to the same money they were going to pay for their health insurance anyway, let's say, then that person would have this account that they own that they would be able to use to buy their health insurance. This would immediately make health insurance portable. All right. So that's a really big thing. And you wouldn't just do it with people who have health insurance through their employers. You would also do it for people who are on Medicaid. So instead of forcing people in Medicaid to get this trash health coverage plan from the government, they would buy health insurance like everyone else using an HSA account that would be filled by the government on a sliding scale based on how much income you have. Okay. Yeah. And then on top of it, you have that, plus you have association health plans, which is a really amazing, incredible idea that allows people to get together and buy health insurance as a group, regardless of, it doesn't have to be through an employer. It could be any association of people, any group of people based on geography, based on the church you go to, maybe based on being in the NRA or being in the AARP or whatever. You can get together as a big group and buy health insurance, because that's the other issue. When you buy as an individual, you have very little negotiating power. So that's why prices in the Obamacare exchanges are so high compared to what you get if you're buying it getting it through an employer as a group plan, because you have a lot more negotiating power as a group, and you don't have to worry about the pre-existing conditions issue if you're buying as a group, because you just have one big group rate and the health insurance company knows we have to charge a little bit more money because we know some people in this group probably have a pre-existing condition. It's all based on these actuarial tables and stuff like that. So if you combine those two things together, along with a bunch of other free market reforms like direct primary care, which cuts out the health insurance middleman in primary care services, and also increasing dramatically the number of doctors that we have, and allowing nurse practitioners and other healthcare professionals to provide more healthcare services on their own without having a doctor present. All of these things combined together would make health insurance really, really affordable. And that's the key. Make health insurance really affordable so we don't need some kind of healthcare plan. And people who are really, really poor, the thing I love about association health plans is that you could have sort of charitable association health plans, so to speak, where you have these plans that allow people to get into them who maybe don't have very much money or don't have any money at all, but because they belong to the church group all gets together and says we're gonna buy health insurance for the church. And if you're poor, you can't afford it, that's okay. We're all gonna share the cost together. And
that's okay. There's another church down the road you can join.
That would be Isaac's church. So
the Church of Money.
Right. So you see what I'm saying? There are ways for us to take care of each other without having to have some stupid government program that doesn't work very well.
Well, yeah, I mean, the one thing that I was going to say about like I think this article goes into it is the idea of the that like that mandatory transparency thing. And it's just like that's just proof that like we are so far from a free market industry when it comes to healthcare, because like what other industry do they hide the prices of stuff, or at least not make it readily apparent?
That's right. So, and there's because the consumer has no power in healthcare. They have no power.
But like the idea that you'd be spending for your modern or everyday type of things or whatever your more common practices through your healthcare savings account, that would open up the door for the provider of these services to show you what the costs are, because now you're paying from your own account. So it's just introducing the supply and demand, these price signals. It's a fantastic.
Yeah, so, if you're shopping around, you're going to want to know what the price of all these things are, and that's the thing. You don't shop around.
That's right, gentlemen. We are out of time. Any jokes, anecdotes, anything you want to get off your chest before we sign off for the week? Hearing nothing, I will say for all of those that are listening to the audio only of the podcast, check out our YouTube page. We're going to be doing this as a video podcast from here on out, unless something terrible happens. And again, we want to get more viewer involvement, so be looking for that. We'll keep you updated. But yeah, tune into our YouTube page. Check it out. Thank you for listening. Tune in every Friday for a new episode of the In the Tank podcast. If you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. You can find us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and like I said, YouTube. If you would like, you can follow us on In the Tank Pod on Twitter. Also, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook and Twitter.
Isaac, where can the fine people find you?
On Twitter at The Fracking Guy and Justin Trash Bins. That's my burner account. I'm going to go ahead and out myself.
The mask has been revealed.
Yeah. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought that was you?
I love follow Justin Trash Bins because I trash Justin quite a bit, and I tag Matt Brunig in whatever Justin posts.
And the best part is Matt Brunig often responds.
No, I love
really strange, but he does. What a loser.
Jim, where can the fine people find you?
At Jay Lakely on Twitter. Also follow the Heartland Institute at Heartland Inst, and also, of course, visit heartland.org for all the stuff we do.
All right. Thank you, Andy, producer extraordinaire, and we will talk to you next week.